All right, so this is lecture 2, and in lecture 1, we essentially just introduced ourselves. This essentially, we're going to discuss level design as architecture. And some of the elements that we'll go over are, what is the function of level design? And really it encapsulates these few things. It's really where the gameplay happens, where you observe the rules, and you help create deep, meaningful cognitive interactions through your player. You can show them through narrative, stories, or game mechanics, what happened in the environment through scenes, right? Like, there's a wanted sign of a little teddy bear, and it shows that, like, a little girl was missing it, and sort of creating that connection to you is like, oh, like, I want to help this little kid get their teddy bear back. So there's really two types of game designers, and there's the Lydologists and Neurotologists, and really Lydologists focus on things like game mechanics. So let's say you have a paintball game where you have somebody who has a character that has sort of like a sniper paintball rifle. Well, a Lydologist would say, well, let's not talk about the story behind why the person wants to shoot the other person with the paintball. Let's design the game mechanics so that they have the most optimal place of shooting paintball at the highest level. Whereas the neurotologist thinks about the story or narrative or deeper meaning behind it. So here you could see we have John and Brenda Romero. John was the creator of Doom, or who's the art director on Doom, with John Carmack and a few others. And this is his wife, Brenda Romero, who's more of a neurotologist, where he's more of a ludologist. Now, Brenda Romero created a game called Trains, right? And in Trains, you're a train conductor, and you pull these cards, and it tells you how many people you need to pack into the train. So the entire time you're doing your best to pack in these little yellow pieces, and then you pull off these other cards which tell you the destination, so you're kind of moving the train to the new destination. But in that last example, when you pull up the last card, you realize that you're driving the train to Auschwitz. And most people have a moral gut reaction that they don't even want to finish the game. And so the neurotologist will sort of be able to tell the story, whether it's historical or personal. And a personal example here is this game, That Dragon Cancer. Now, a friend of mine was actually the art director on this project, and he was telling me that the creator of the project, or the creator of this game, had the hardest time dealing with the death of his son from cancer. And so what he did is he created a game to help him cope and deal with that. And so these games exist, again, from a personal level, historical, or just sort of to talk about a current crisis, right? So right now there's a talk of immigration, and people are for or against certain aspects of it. And so Paper Please sort of highlights certain elements of how allowing the correct or right or quote-unquote wrong people into a country can affect it. And then there's these stories that are based on a little bit of history and a little bit of fiction. So there's this great quote that Walt Disney supposedly really liked, and it goes, "I must create a system or be enslaved by another man. My business is not to reason and compare, it is to create." And it's by, I think, William Blake, and from The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Now, Kevin Levine, who created a game called BioShock, I believe was reading, the way the story goes, he was reading this book called Triumph of the American Imagination by Neil Gabler. And he fell in love with the concept that Walt Disney was trying to create a utopia on this planet. And that's where the center of this statue was going to sit, and then there was a park bench underneath it where him and his wife were going to sit and just kind of look at what they did. And this utopia would have the best schools, the best scientists, the best researchers. Well, once he heard that story, he decided to use the story of Walt Disney and created the game BioShock. And those of you who don't know BioShock, it's, look it up. It's really about this character named Andrew Ryan that he, again, you can see based on Walt Disney. And so you can see here that there's certain aspects within the game where he used, real life elements from the life of Walt Disney and examples from Walt Disney's theme parks. Now, there's a couple of many different types of level design. So once you have your idea picked out and you want to design a level, there's a couple to go with. The most famous one is The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. And you can see here there's The Matrix, Star Wars, there's all of the Pinocchio, and they all follow this same hero's journey path. And this is the one I'm going to focus on. And I think it's probably the most exciting. It's the most fun that I ever use whenever I'm creating my stories. And really the way it starts off is, just like Neo here in his office, you're in an ordinary place. And then here you meet a mentor. And within that mentor, for Neo, it was Morpheus. For it was Luke, it was Obi-Wan. And as you go on throughout the story, you discover some sort of supernatural element. You use that supernatural element for good or evil, and then you're stuck in some sort of place where you're at the lowest point, and you're like questioning whether you should go on that journey or not. And then your character decides to take a specific path. It works through. They test out their skills against who the primary person that was sort of telling them that they weren't good enough, or they're challenged within their skills by someone, right? Whether it's a bully or whatever. And then they're rewarded for this. And then as time goes on, they eventually get to the point where they're learning, then they're developing their new skills, and then in the end they face another battle of like whoever the master enemy is or the final boss, and then rinse and repeat with each level. Now, there's some other elements as you have your story together and you start to think about your game design document and so forth. And that's where how do you start to design the levels for your story? And one of the best ways of doing it is to just think about how architecture works. So like a lot of the Tom Clancy games, for instance, use real world environments within them to sort of as a modeling point. And the reason for that is modern architecture is so beautiful, and it's probably one of the strongest ways of conveying something or getting a meaning. And that's why within your homework assignment, I have you actually use real floor plans within your Unreal level. Now, there's Vitruvius, who's one of the, he's an early Roman architect, and he had three things that he really felt like every piece of architecture, and I tend to agree with him. And that's firmness, utility, and then there's this element called venustis, which really has to do with the vital elements of architecture in respect to their beauty. Now, none of these exist in a parkism. So you can see you have your functional requirements, you have your usability of those requirements, like are the elements within the games usable? And then do they bring joy, delight, or even, I would even expand this to, does this bring the person fear? And that's what comes into level design. So if you're designing like a scary game. Now, I'm going to let Edwin McKay from Super Meat Boy explain a little bit about how those elements transfer over to good game design.
Level design. So the basic formulas of level design go: when you start out, you want to teach the player how to play. And you need to make sure that they understand every mechanic of the game. So every level in the first chapter needs to have some example forcing the player to do something in order to beat the level that they will need further in the game. So like there's a level, I think level 3, that is just a gap. And the only way to get over that gap is to hold down run and jump. You can't get it any other way. You can't just keep jumping around. You won't jump far enough. And that's to make sure that the player understands that in order to get over far gaps that you need to press and hold the run button and jump across it. It's simple. It sounds like a no-brainer, but it's something that usually in games it would just say, hold run to jump far. Most people will just skip the text and they will forget. Now, just in case somebody didn't play that level, a couple levels later, I reiterate and I give them another section of a level that requires them to run and jump to make sure that they know how to do it, because it's important. Like all these mechanics are very important. And each level in the chapter is another level that pushes that. Like there's a level where you need to continuously jump up one wall because there's no other wall to jump to. That's me teaching the player that you can do this. And everybody in the world will see a problem and want to solve it. So if you see something where it's just a wall and you don't realize you can keep jumping up the wall, you're going to try it right away. And once you try it yourself, you taught yourself, not only do you feel smart, like you've figured out something yourself, you also now for sure know how to do that from then on in the game. So all these levels of introduction they go through everything, and once you've basically cleared out all the things you can do with Meat Boy, then you start introducing new mechanics. And with Meat Boy, it's not like Mario, where lots of the Mario games introduce new mechanics in forms of suits that change Mario's properties. And that's something that I wanted to avoid, and I wanted to make it really, really pure. Meat Boy never gets better or gets a power-up. It's the levels that change the mechanics. So right away you introduce saws, and they're usually static saws that just spin in place, and you have to avoid static saws. Then later, those same saws that you know how that they kill you and they know that they're round, those same saws then will start moving back and forth. So you got moving saws. And then, even later than that, you'll get these saws that are on these little spinners that act like windmills, and they go around in a circle. Now it's the same saw that you've jumped over a million times before, but it's coming at you in a different way. And it's just expanding on the basic mechanic and making it different and more enjoyable each time. As a designer, you want to explore each mechanic and make sure that it can be enjoyed at least 3 or 4 different ways. If it's only got one use and you can only get one use out of it, then it's pointless because you need to be able to juice it. You got to figure out new ways to use it.
All right, so I want to talk about a little case study from my own work. So I was interning at this company called Midway Games, which is now NetherRealms, and at the time they were working on this game called Psyops. Now, Psyops is essentially this game where you're this psychic operative, right? And you can carry things with your mind. Now, the reason I bring this up is one of the elements within the game that happened after release that we never found through testing that made the game pretty easy was that you're able to, as I mentioned, lift elements in the game with your mind. Well, what people were able to do is they were able to lift up things like blow up a piece of the wall and the wall would fall. Then they would be able to walk on that wall and they'd have to they'd lift themselves up with using that piece of wood or that piece of flooring and float through the entire level so the other enemies couldn't shoot them. So these are the things you want to think about when respect to level design as you're designing your games is you want to test everything and have good quality assurance testers. Now, the last concept before we get into the homework is as you're developing your levels, I want to talk about this concept called sacred spaces. Now, if you're in the Christian faith, you've heard this term before where if you go to church, you're within a sacred space. Or you're with a loved one, you're in a sacred space, which means you give them 100% of your time. And you also prepare yourself before you enter that sacred space, right? So you free yourself of any wrongdoings or anger or harshness. So for example, in the game Mega Man, the concept of sacred spaces was taken to a very considerable level. So here you could see this is Mega Man. And before they can enter this boss room to do battle with this boss, they would not let the character in unless the character was prepared. So this was a sacred space, and you had to have completed so many different levels before you go in there. And sometimes what they would do is allow you to go in there and then lose considerably for you to realize that you haven't received the tools that you need and the learning that you need in order to enter that sacred space. So this is it's also called spatial symbols with these gates or walls. So this is another concept I want you to think about as you start to thinking about level designing your games. Now, let's talk a little bit about the environment modeling homework. Now, as I mentioned before, at Unreal 5, you're going to go to houseplans.com. You'll see there's a separate videos that go over just how to do the homework. But you're going to create these walls, and you're going to be using a blueprint to do it. And the way the homework is going to be graded is, it's essentially this. If you get the flow down and your environment matches the objects and you can get these elements up on a website, you can get a C. So if you just do the homework as it is. But there's a fourth element called refining the project where you go a little bit more. Like say you go ahead and you model the second floor or you model stairs that go up to another room. You do a little bit extra there and that's how you can get an A in the project. Now, please feel free to email me if you have any questions about this or you're concerned. My goal is to not only help you become great game designers, but help you pass this class with the best grade possible. Thank you.